Hey, thanks for stopping by. If you've come over for the Jaws of the Lion guide, you're in the right place, but you're probably wondering, who the heck is this guy and why is he telling me exactly how to play this game? Well, I'm Carlo, I'm one half of All You Can Board, the other half is my cousin Dylan, and we're huge Gloomhaven fans. We've been playing a lot of Gloomhaven, as well as the expansion Forgotten Circles, over the past couple of years, and I just finished playing through Jaws of the Lion solo. So I've probably played upwards of about 100 Gloomhaven scenarios or so. I don't claim to be an expert, but I'm also no amateur. I've written a couple guides for the Tinkerer, as a couple other classes from the base game. We've even previewed some of the starting classes for the upcoming Frosthaven game. This is our first video guide, and I chose to put this together because for a while I wondered what it would be like to play Gloomhaven solo. I've seen a lot of people asking about Jaws of the Lion solo, and I figured this might be helpful. I played through it with the Demolitionist and the Hatchet, so this guide is mainly focused towards if you're playing as those two classes, but the idea here is that not everyone's going to be doing that, and I want there to still be stuff that you can get from it, even if you're just using one of these classes in a bigger group. I'll try and highlight throughout the guide where I made choices that were specific to playing it with two players, or what you can change if you're playing in a bigger group. So obviously with a campaign game like this, there are going to be some spoilers throughout the guide. They will mostly be when we're looking at all the level 2 through 9 cards in detail, as well as the items. I'll be sure to kind of give you a warning about spoilers before we get to any major sections. Also, if you want to skip those, you can always use the timestamps below. Otherwise, if you want to get right into the nitty-gritty, just know the items and cards and such, you can use the timestamps to skip below. Otherwise, I'm going to take a minute here to just give you some quick context as to why I kind of picked these classes and give some general tips about playing this game solo if you never have before. So first off, the game comes with 4 classes. There's the 2 I chose, the Demolitionist and Hatchet, and then there's also the Void Warden and the Red Guard. So the Void Warden's more of a support class, which tends to be better in bigger groups of 3 or 4, and the Red Guard is maybe a more safer, more primary tank. The reason I chose the Demolitionist and the Hatchet together is kind of for the play style. They both are a little bit more, they're probably the heaviest damage dealers in the initial set, as well as there's a bit more risk involved. Neither one is like a really primary tank for soaking up a lot of damage, so I just wanted to play a playstyle that involved a bit of risk-taking, doing a lot of damage, and one of the things that if you've listened to experienced players of Gloomhaven talk before, you've probably heard a lot of people say the best form of defense in this game is a good offense, right? You can't just run away from bad guys the whole time because they're gonna come after you. They're gonna hunt you down. You can't run away from your problems. The sooner you face them head on, the sooner you deal with them. So if you kill something, it can't hurt you instead of you just running around healing. And that's kind of what the play style of these two focuses on, is allowing yourself to take damage and get in these risky situations, knowing that you can do more damage and kill things off quicker. So that is why I picked these two classes. The guide is going to, from this point on, go into detail about one class at a time. First, I'll do the Demolitionist, look at all the cards, items, and perks. Then we'll do the Hatchet, and then at the end we'll talk about both of them together and some general strategy. Now, a couple final tips before we jump right in is, you'll notice probably at the bottom of the box that says this is a fully cooperative adventure game. So if you're familiar with the base Gloomhaven, it was more semi-cooperative. You couldn't like share items, and you had secret goals. There was a bit more of trying to do what benefited you while still meeting the party's goals. This game, you are specifically working together. You can't share gold, but you can use one character to buy items and then just give those items. You can trade items, you can hand over items for free. So you can really do all of your looting with one class if it's easier with that one, and then just kind of buy the items for your other class with it. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Take advantage of the fully cooperative nature of this game. Another thing is, playing solo, you obviously have the knowledge of what both your classes are playing. You can decide your cards before you put them down, so in that sense you have more control and it's a little bit easier, which is why they recommend playing the solo version on hard mode. The only harder thing about it without that is that you basically are juggling 2 sets of hands, so there's tougher decisions, but because you know what to expect and you can line up the timing, it really does help to have that extra level of challenge to put it on hard mode, so I highly recommend that. And also, please play this with the Gloomhaven Helper app. It's a fantastic app. I can't say enough about it. If you have any questions about it, leave a comment below. Send me an email at carlo@allyoucanboard.com. I'll help you get this set up. And without further ado, let's jump right in. Alright, so we're going to start with the Demolitionist. Now, this is a class that does not have a lot of health, only a 9-card hand, which is as low as it gets in Gloomhaven. But has one of the best modifier decks I've seen, especially at higher levels. It can get crazy powerful, which we'll see a bit later. And it's a somewhat situational class in the sense that it does really well when there's obstacles, and when there aren't, might struggle a little bit, but you'll see that as we get into these cards. So we're going to go through all the level 1 cards first, starting with Crushing Weight. So this is definitely one of the best cards for this class, especially at level 1. Obviously, the top and bottom are both reusable abilities. You're going to get a lot out of either one. Early initiative, and the fact that you're doubling up, basically getting extra damage if you're hitting something that's next to a wall. So you got a bit of flexibility there. Great cards, or great card, and even the top gives you the XP if you can line it up, so that can really help you build your XP over the course of the campaign. All right, next up is 1-2 Punch. Another solid kind of workhorse level 1 card. You're probably going to bring this to almost every scenario. The initiative is nothing special, but look at the bottom. You've got an attack 1. You're not normally going to have attacks on the bottom. And don't worry about the 1 because, again, I said the modifier deck is really good. So just having an attack on the bottom will come in handy. Plus, it comes with a loot. Because the Demolitionist is going to be your main tank, you're going to be in the fray more. You're going to do most of your looting probably with the Demolitionist rather than the Hatchet. So it's really good to have that. And then the top gives you the back-to-back attack. And you're going to see this kind of theme with the Demolitionist where you have these attacks or these cards that give you multiple attacks lined up. And if you line them up on the same target, it gives you a bonus. So what's good about this kind of stuff is it allows you, first off, if you have a really strong target, you can really go after that one enemy and try and hit them multiple times and take them down and get that bonus effect. But also, let's say you stop next to 2 enemies and one's low and the other one's high up, you can use your first attack to try and pick off that weak enemy, and then you still have a second attack on the other one. So it gives you some flexibility. These are just cards like this that have the double attack, especially for the Demolitionist, are really useful. And the fact that this one lets you push, there's going to be traps, there's going to be all kinds of stuff in these scenarios. So just another solid card, not quite as good as Crushing Weight, but still going to get a lot done for you. Next up, we've got Knockout the Support. So this is one of those cards that is going to be at its best when there are obstacles on the scenario. If there aren't obstacles, there's some scenarios that didn't have obstacles or didn't have many where I actually left this behind. So again, you've got early initiative, standard move 2. If you destroy an obstacle, adjacent obstacle, gain an XP and perform Strengthen Self. So getting the Strengthen is huge. As we're going to see later with this modifier deck, as it slims down, yeah, you're full of awesome cards in there, but that means that your null is going to come up more often if it's a slimmed down deck. So having advantage from things like Strengthen or certain items that we're going to talk about later is so useful for this class. The top ability is a pretty standard, just melee attack 3. It does a bit of reduced healing to that enemy it attacks. So I didn't find I used that part of it as much. But again, if there are obstacles, bring this, use it early, get the Strengthen so that your attacks line up and you can pick enemies off sooner. Next up, we've got the big one, which is kind of similar to Knockout the Support. It's a move 3 instead of 2. The initiative's not quite as good, but it's another one of these destroy an adjacent obstacle and gain a benefit. So this one gives you a blessing instead. So obviously the blessing goes into your deck. You don't know if you're going to actually draw it, unlike the strength in which you know you're getting the advantage. But still, loading up your deck with more blessings is never a bad thing as the Demolitionist. Plus, this one comes with a powerful loss ability on the top. You might remember, so when I mentioned that this is a 9-card class, it means you really can't afford to be losing cards often or you're going to exhaust, or it's going to make you have to take more long rests. So this is something, the top, that you would use kind of at the end of a scenario, or near the end of a scenario, or if there's just a really big clump of enemies and you think you can pick them off. So it's a good one, but again, if you know you're going into a scenario with no obstacles at all, it might not be worth it just for the move 3 and the situational top ability that you might not use. So don't bring it all the time, but it is a great card. Next up, we've got Explosive Blitz. This card is crazy. First off, this class is almost entirely melee, and you get a top attack 2 range 4, which is decent, like really good range actually. A lot of the time when you get these range attacks, they're 2 or 3 range, plus you get fire. It's early initiative. But what makes this card amazing is the bottom. It's a loss ability, but it's one of the better ones I've seen in all of Gloomhaven, to be honest with you. This single-handedly won me many scenarios. I'm serious. This you pretty much plan a lot of your initial scenario around this card. Move 3, if you opened a door during the movement, perform stun targeting all enemies within range 3, and then you lose it. You basically just, at the end of the scenario, you have the map laid out in front of you. You can see where the rooms are, identify which room do you want to save this for, and then you basically tee yourself up. The turn before, you get 1 hex right before the door, so that you're standing as close to the door as possible. And then on your next turn, when you pop this at the start, your first movement gets you into the doorway, you get to reveal the room, and then you still have 2 move left to position yourself, and anything within range 3. I mean, it's insane. Sometimes you can stun the entire room. Sometimes there's rooms you go into just to grab a chest or do something and get out, and you can do that right away, or it just really helps you and your hatchet get in there safely and buy you some time. I can't say enough good things about this card. But if you're ever in a scenario that just has, for example, 1 big room and you don't have to move around a lot, you probably don't need this just for the ranged attack up top, but amazing card. You'll probably bring this to scenarios even at higher levels. Next up, we've got Piston Punch. So obviously we just went over a crazy stun card that hits all kinds of the number of enemies. This is the only other stun card you get, or at least at level 1, for the Demolitionist. It's only a single target one, but it's reusable. So the initiative, 42, nothing really special, but having a stun, especially on the bottom, where almost all your bottom moves are moves, or bottom abilities are moves, other than that one other attack one, but having a stun there is really nice, and if you have Earth, you can also consume that to poison as well, so not bad at all. The top, attack 2, push 2, as a standard is pretty solid already, and if you can consume the fire, getting an attack 3 with a push 3 potentially, and gaining an XP, is just solid all around. There's no loss on either one, so even though the initiative isn't great, it's just kind of one of those, maybe not workhorse cards again, it's not going to be one you bring to every scenario, but at least until level 2 or 3, you're probably going to see this a lot. Next up, we've got Wind Up. Very interesting card. This is often one of the best cards to play on the first turn of the scenario, because since you're playing as a mostly melee character, a lot of the times you can't even get in range to attack something at the start, or maybe you want to get something set up. Using Wind Up later on when you're in the middle of a battle doesn't do anything to you for you because you're basically setting it up to have a more powerful action later. So on the bottom, you can double the value of your next movement ability. To be honest, I think I might have used that maybe once at most. I used it for the top more often. Think about playing this at the very first turn of the scenario. On your next 2 attacks, add +2 attack. And once you've done that twice, you can get the XP, and it's not a loss. It's going to go into your discard pile. You can get it again, so every time you set this up, you're basically giving yourself +2 damage on your next 2 attacks. Super useful, especially, again, like I said, early on in a scenario, gets you set up for some really big turns. And it doesn't hurt to have 1 or 2 late initiative cards in your ranks in case you want to go late in a round. So Wind Up's a great choice, and one that I didn't take maybe every time, but more than half the scenarios. So now we've got Implode and Explode. We're going to start with Implode. It's got a really late initiative, 88, move 3, destroy an obstacle within range 3. I mean, personally, I didn't find the obstacles really prevented me from getting around as much. Like, yes, this class focuses, or has a large focus on destroying obstacles, but if the destroying obstacle doesn't come with an immediate benefit, you're mostly just using it to clear a path for yourself. Sometimes you might even be clearing a path for an enemy to get to you quicker, so I just found that one's a little situational. The top, attack 3 is never bad, and you can consume Earth to make an attack 4 with Muddle. Solid card enough, I guess, but with a 9-card hand, I often found this was like the 10th card that I wanted to bring, so it just got left out or kind of just made it in. Once you start to get to level 2, 3, you probably won't take this much, but it's decent for level 1 card. So now it's sort of counterpart, Explode. So much earlier initiative, you've got a move 4 on the bottom, you can consume fire to make it a move 6, which is awesome. The top is a loss ability, and it's another one of these kind of situational ones, and of all the situational abilities or destroy obstacle abilities that the Demolitionist has, this is probably the one I used the least, just because. So here's something I haven't touched on yet. When you're playing with 3 or 4 players, there's more enemies on the map. That's kind of how the game scales. They don't have more health or not, it's just the number of players you have or characters determines the number of enemies. So if you're playing with 3 or 4, there's going to be way more enemies around, but when you're playing with only 2 players, like this says, when you destroy an adjacent obstacle, gain 2 and perform stun, targeting all enemies adjacent to the destroyed obstacle, and each target suffers 2 damage. If there's not many enemies in the scenario, if you're only going to, trigger this on 1 or 2 enemies, is it really worth it to lose a card for that? Tough to say. The movement 4 is really good, though. Early initiative, making it a movement 6. A lot of the time, it's going to work its way into your hand, but again, at higher levels, you're probably going to have to find that you're just going to leave it behind. So now we get to the 3 X cards at level 1, and to be honest, there's really only one of these that I made any use of, so we'll go over that one first, which is Level. So we'll focus on the bottom first, add +1 attack to all your melee attacks this round. Nothing crazy special, but we've seen that the Demolitionist has some of those cards, or we've seen one so far and we'll see more later, where you have multiple attacks on the same ability on the top. So for something like that, you're going to be boosting all of them. Not bad. But truly, the only reason I ever brought this card to a scenario is when you have objectives, which are highlighted by the yellow borders around the hexagons. So attack 3, add +3 attack and gain an XP if the target is an objective. Pretty simple. If the scenario has objectives, take this. If it doesn't, leave it behind. You have better cards. The last 2 level X cards are both pretty situational, and they both revolve around traps. I just mentioned kind of how there's fewer enemies when you're playing in a 2-player game, so making use of traps is harder, because if you're laying down traps but you don't actually push anything into them, then they're just wasted turns. So I don't think I need to go into these in too much detail. Lobbed Charge just lets you create that muddle, trap within a hex within range 3. Situational Bottom and Rubble, really with move 2, creating a 2 damage trap in an adjacent hex. Again, these are just ones that are too situational, and you don't really have room for a lot of situational stuff in a 2-player party because everyone has a fairly defined role. And yeah, I honestly didn't use either of these last 2 X cards for any of the scenarios, but you might do differently. So I don't really believe in just picking one set of cards and saying this, when you hit this level, this is the hand that you take to every single scenario. I think it's got to be flexible, but the Demolitionist is maybe more rigid than most characters, and at least at first. I went over all these cards. I would say at first just take the first 9 I mentioned, which are Crushing Weight, 1-2 Punch, Knock Out the Support, the big one, Explosive Blitz, Piston Punch, Wind Up, Implode, and Explode. That'll be your best 9 card hand at first. The only other time you're going to do something differently than that, I would say, is if the scenario is heavy on objectives, take that level card instead and just swap out something like Implode or Explode that you don't need. Things will get a little more complicated as we move on and the choices become more difficult. The only other thing I want to mention is that when I got to the final boss scenario, I was only level 7. Technically, I hit level 8 when I beat it, but so I only really played up to level 7. I'll still give my advice on what I would have taken at level 8 or 9, but either way, we're going to jump into those level cards now. Keep in mind, this is where we get into some spoilers. If you don't want to see any level 2 through 9 cards, skip ahead. Otherwise, we'll jump right into those now. So at level 2, you already have some pretty good options, and you get what I think is one of your better cards already, which is Robotic Enhancement. So this was my choice I took. Decent initiative. The bottom, move 4, with the movement being unaffected by difficult terrain, is actually pretty huge because you don't really have a lot of like jumps and ways to easily move around a lot with this character, so being able to actually move through difficult terrain is super useful. And at the top, having an attack 2 stun that's reusable is also just great. There's nothing really like maybe spectacular about the card, but it's just one of those super reliable cards that you can always count on. It's going to work early in scenarios, late in scenarios. Never, ever, ever leave this one behind. It's one of your most solid cards. The other option, Crash Protocol, is definitely kind of the more like flashier, maybe a little more exciting option. I just didn't think it was going to be as useful in the long run, and again, we get back to it is situational, which we don't have as much room for that kind of thing. It does give you the move 3 jump, and it's not a loss, which is awesome. Obviously, it's got that ability where each time you enter a hex containing an obstacle, you can destroy that obstacle and add 1 movement, and then you can make those enemies suffer a damage, so you can kind of queue up for these big moves where you move through a bunch of stuff and do some damage. But again, you kind of have to plan out and line everything up. The top ability is a loss, can be really good, but again, it's kind of situational just because these enemies have to be next to walls. So could be good. It's not a bad card, but for me, I just felt like Robotic Enhancement was the easy choice for something you can always rely on. Okay, level 3, we are taking Fire Bombs. This is a great card and something that you don't really see a lot of for the Demolitionist. So let's look at the top first. Attack 2, range 4, target 2. So first off, range 4 is decent. Being able to hit 2 targets at that range when you're normally a melee class is awesome, and producing a fire. It's got 24 initiative, which is one of your earlier ones. You don't have too early initiative cards with this class. And then even the bottom, the move 2 is just standard, but obviously if you can trigger the extra one, destroying the adjacent obstacle, gaining an XP, all enemies adjacent to the destroyed obstacle suffer 2 damage. Remember this too, anytime I mention something that suffer 2 damage, that means that a shield won't block that. So there's a lot of enemies in this game that don't have a lot of health but have big shields, and that's where a lot of these Demolitionist abilities that say suffer a damage or enemy suffers 2 damage really come into play. So again, there's neither one of these is a loss. They're just one of those like super reliable cards again. The other option, Nowhere to Run, does give you some interesting options. The bottom with the move 3 and moving an adjacent trap. Like, moving traps can come in handy, but again, with not as many enemies, it's very situational and difficult to actually execute to its fullest. The top is obviously a kind of nice loss. The attack 4, add +1 attack for each wall hex, obstacle hex, objective, figure, or trap adjacent to the target. You can do some pretty crazy damage with this, but realistically, how often are you going to need to do that much damage to one, and then you're going to sit there trying to figure out how to make sure that it's next to all these different things? Just go with the Fire Bombs, especially when you're just playing with one other class. You can really benefit from your melee guy having range once in a while. And sorry, I shouldn't say guy because the Demolitionist does not identify as he or she. It's very clearly they, which is awesome. On to level 4, which is definitely you want to go with extra fuel here. First off, 17 initiative, I believe, becomes your earliest initiative at this point. Move 5, your best move up to this point. Plus the bottom, you can consume fire to add an attack. You might be looking at, oh yeah, but it's only attack 1. Forget it. Don't look at the attack values on these Demolitionist cards because, again, you have one of the best modifier decks. You're going to have items later that help this out. The main thing is you can move 5 spaces, get in an attack with this thing first, and then still use the top ability on another card to do another attack. It's just great. And then look at the top. Attack 3, add +2 attack, wound, and gain an XP if the target's adjacent to a wall, creating fire again. So you're probably noticing there's a lot of stuff where we can create and use fire for the Demolitionist. There's a bit of earth as well, but fire is definitely the more important element. And this card both gives you fire and gives you the ability to consume it for something useful. And again, just super early initiative. Great card. Remote Detonation has some interesting stuff going on, but it's all specific to obstacles and traps, which again are a little situational. We're not going the trap route, so I won't even focus on the bottom. The top, you can destroy an obstacle and perform these attacks, but again, you're targeting all enemies adjacent to that obstacle. These are the type of cards that if you were playing in a 3 or 4 player party and there's way more enemies, maybe something like this would have more value, but for me in a solo game with just these 2, Extra Fuel was the easy choice here. Okay, now level 5 is huge. This is extra spoiler level. If you were okay with seeing the cards, and that's fine, cool, but there's another kind of added spoiler to level 5 in this game for all the classes. If you want to discover that for yourself, skip ahead. If you don't mind the spoiler, well, here it comes. At level 5, you only get 1 card option, and it's sort of a transformative stage for your class. So the Demolitionist gets the card Mech Suit, which is just amazing. I mean, thematically, the way the mechanics of the card itself work, I just love it. Let's get the bottom out of the way first because it's a little more simple. Move 2, loot 1. Again, you're going to be the main tank. You're going to be in the fray. It's better to have the loot on the Demolitionist than a Hatchet, so that's a very welcome addition. The top is what makes this card, though. First off, the box comes with an extra, I want to call it a mini, but it's kind of a giant miniature, where when you play the top of this, you remove your tiny little Demolitionist mini, and you get this giant mech mini. And basically, it's a loss, but from now on, your maximum hit point value is increased by 5, heal 10 self, and permanent shield 1 for the rest of the scenario with 2 XP. So this is basically something where, okay, when you gain that 5 hit points, that first part, you don't heal 5 as well. So your maximum goes up by 5, then you heal 10. So the ideal time to use this is if you've already lost at least 5 health in a scenario, and you don't want to use it too early because you don't want to be losing cards before you've actually rested a couple times, because then it kind of exponentially increases how quickly you're going to exhaust. But if you get, take 5-10 damage through a scenario, then you pop this, basically it's your second wind, your recharge for the scenario. Gain a bunch of health, and now you've got a permanent shield 1 for the rest of the time. It's such a satisfying card to use when you're halfway through the scenario or whatever, and you take your little miniature off the map and put this giant mech down, and you're just kind of souped up now and can just soak up all this damage. It's just awesome, and one of my favorite things about this class. So easy choice to not go back and take a previous level card, take the Mech Suit. Okay, we're going to get to the second option, Dust Cloud, in a second, but I just got to say Drill Fist is just too good to pass up here. So look at the top. I was talking about this before with these abilities where you get multiple attacks. This one gives you 3. So you got attack 1, attack 1, attack 2. Remember that you can target the same or different enemies with those. It's up to you. If you targeted the same enemy with all 3, you're going to ignore their shield value, add poison, and gain an XP. So this is what I was kind of saying before. If you're looking to really hit one target, you can hit them really hard. But if you're next to 2 or 3 targets, some of them are maybe low health, or you've got some status effects that affect all your attacks this turn, you can kind of spread out the damage, kill multiple enemies, spread those status effects, whatever. Super useful card. Bottom ability is also decent. Move 2, place one of your character tokens on an adjacent normal or elite enemy. You and all allies may ignore the shield value. I can't honestly say I ever took advantage of that one just because the top is so much better, and if you use the bottom, then this is going to have to sit in your discard pile. You're going to have to wait till you get it back again. So, I mean, I'm sure it could come in handy once in a while, but that top is just so useful. Dust Cloud, nothing to sneeze at. I mean, it's a great card. 15 would be your earliest initiative at this point if you took it. Move 2, destroy an adjacent obstacle. If you do gain an XP and perform shield 2 for the round, not bad to add shield 2, especially, again, at higher levels, you're going to be taking lots of damage from enemies. And at the top, even targeting or hitting for attack 2 on all adjacent enemies, pushing, muddling. If you can get into a pack, again, this is one of those ones, if you're playing with 3 or 4 players and there's way more enemies on the battlefield, it might make more sense to take something like this because you might actually be hitting 3-4 enemies instead of just 1 or 2 if you're playing with 2 players. Plus, if you're going for more of a build that focuses on using that earth element, you might find use in this, but the way I played the Demolitionist, I definitely made a lot more use of fire, so Drill Fist was an easy choice here. Level 7 brings another really interesting card. We've talked before earlier about how this class has very limited ranged abilities, but when they come up, they tend to be pretty good, and this one is no exception. Micro Missiles, early initiative with 16. Look at this top attack. Attack 2, range 3, target 4. Again, with having such a good modifier deck later on, hitting 4 targets, it doesn't matter if it's attack 2. You've got items you can boost this with. You're drawing +2s and, crits out of your modifier deck. You're going to be hitting hard with this card. Such a good card. Especially early in a scenario, you're not usually very close to your enemies, so having range 3, potentially hitting 4 targets, like sometimes you don't even have to move right off the bat to dish out some damage first turn. And the bottom, move 2, all objectives within range 3 suffer 3 damage, produce earth. Again, the top is so good that I'm rarely going to use it for the bottom, but if you're on a map or a scenario that does have a lot of objectives, you can definitely make use of that, and it'll help you out. The other option that I didn't take was Insult to Injury. Obviously on the bottom you got the move 4, add Immobilize to all your attacks this round. You can consume the earth for the muddle, so again, if you're going for that earth build, you can make some good use out of that. The top is a loss. On next 3 attacks targeting enemies you attacked earlier in the same round, add +3 attack. So if you're going to be kind of, walloping on the same enemy over and over, it kind of helps you. But as we're going to see, the Hatchet is kind of the specialist in single target focus damage. So I don't really worry about that as much with the Demolitionist. And again, Micro Missiles are just so good, and having that flexibility to help out at range and not just leaving that all up to the Hatchet is such a bonus for the Demolitionist. So again, Micro Missiles was an easy choice. So level 8, I'll take this opportunity to remind you, I only technically hit level 8 with both classes as soon as I beat the last scenario, so I didn't actually play at level 8 or make any of these choices, but they are interesting cards I'd like to look over anyway. Gut Punch is, attack 3 stun on the bottom. We've talked before, you don't really get attacks on the bottom as it is, let alone stuns. To get an attack 3 stun on the bottom with 26 initiative as a reusable card is fantastic. And then the top, attack 5. If you played Gloomhaven before, just an attack 5 on its own is already solid. And then if you can consume elements, you can either boost the attack or push or immobilize, farm some more XP. Solid card. Honestly, it's not as flashy as the next option, but it's probably the one I would have taken if I played up to that point. Your other option is the bigger one, which is basically your upgrade on the big one from level 1. It doesn't have the thing at the bottom about destroying obstacles. It still gives the move 3. And look at this, it's 5, 9, 12 hexes on this thing. Attack 4, range 2, still produces the elements, whatever. Destroy all obstacles in the targeted area. All allies in the targeted area suffer 2 damage. So again, if you're playing in 3 or 4 player groups, you got to be a little more careful because you have more allies you might hit with this. It is only 2 damage, maybe not that much. It could be a fun card to use, I'm sure, but again, it is a little situational, and Gut Punch just seems like it would be the better option here, I think. And level 9, we've got, couple very interesting cards. Collateral Damage, move 2, destroy an adjacent obstacle. If you do, gain 1, and all enemies in the same room as the destroyed obstacle suffer 2 damage. Again, this is wild. Especially at higher player counts, imagine you have a room with 8 enemies and you just destroy 1 obstacle and then run out and they all suffer 2 damage. Again, as you go on and you're facing these shielded enemies that are pesky, and this can be such a big bonus, just having things suffer damage without you needing to pull stuff out of your modifier deck to see if you missed or whatever, or using up your good numbers on those. The top is obviously a loss. Destroy an adjacent obstacle or objective. If you do, gain 1 XP and perform attack 4, push 2, targeting all adjacent enemies. It's kind of another one of those situational ones where if you can get in the middle of a pack of guys and hit them all, it's awesome, but I think the bottom is a little more appealing. The next one, Wholesale Destruction. Look at the top. Attack 2, move 2, attack 3. You can consume a fire. Just pretty crazy, stacking abilities there, or stacking attacks. And then the bottom's not bad either, because you can basically destroy an obstacle ability, or perform and destroy an obstacle ability as if an empty hex within range of this ability contains an obstacle. It's a little bit of a tricky one. It says don't place a destruction token. Again, these are the ones where it just felt like to make use of these, you're going to have to slow the game down a lot. I didn't really, again, even get to level 9, so they're both interesting cards, and I think you'd be safe going with either one, really. So before we move on to the items, I'll just give you a quick heads up. If you're looking for some advice on what to go into the final boss scenario with, my 9-card hand for that ended up being, keep in mind at level 7, I took Micro Missiles, Drill Fist, Mech Suit, Extra Fuel, Fire Bombs, Robotic Enhancement, and then the level 1 cards that I took with that were Crushing Weight, the big one, and Wind Up. Wind Up is obviously good just for charging up your attacks, so I'm not saying this is necessarily the best hand, but worked out for me. Alright, so during the little quick start tutorial, those first 5 scenarios, you're going to get 30 gold to spend on your first set of items, so I'll give you a bit of advice on that, and then the rest of the item section is going to be pretty heavy on spoilers due to at what points in the campaign that you unlock these items. So with your starting 30 gold, personally I got the Winged Shoes. I found it was an excellent item. You can use that, that jump early on really comes in handy, especially because with the Demolitionist, your movement is so important. You know, being able to get into the right spots so that you can actually do that melee attack or be the one to tank so that your hatchet doesn't get hit. Positioning is so important right from the first scenario. So that was 15 gold, and I also took a healing potion with the other 10 just because neither of these classes have a lot of healing. So yeah, I found those worked out super well. Leaves you 5 gold to spare for buying another item later. And yeah, now heavy spoilers ahead for the rest of the items. So we're going to look right at what my final item build suggestions are going to be, and I'll just go through them for each category, and then I'll make suggestions as to if there were other alternatives or other items I used along the way. So first off, for head item, we go with the Eagle Eye Goggles. I'm going to get back to them in a second because I want to say that for most of the campaign, I actually ended up using the Amulet of Life, which is, you know, you activate it during your turn, perform a Heal 1 self action. Heal 1 doesn't seem like a lot, and you're not getting it for that number 1. But keep in mind, Heal 1 gets poison and wound off of you, and there's a lot of enemies in this game that are going to have those status effects, and because you're going to be the main tank, you're going to be taking tons of hits all the time. I cannot stress how often you're going to even just get poisoned one turn, and maybe someone uses a card ability or something to heal you, and then the very next turn you're poisoned again or wounded. Having this Amulet of Life is so useful. But later in the game, maybe when you have other things to stave off damage and you've gotten that level 5 card I talked about before and stuff, you maybe don't need the heal as much, and at that point you can probably upgrade to the Eagle Eye Goggles just because you start getting those things like the Drill Fist, which has those 3 back-to-back attacks. You've got all these cards, and as your modifier deck slims down, you really don't want to be pulling that null card when it's like a 1 in 10 or a 1 in 12 chance or whatever once you've got that really slimmed down deck, so the Eagle Eye Goggles really helps with that. Next up is chest item. We are going to go with Chain Armor. Honestly, this is the only chest item I bought for the Demolitionist, kept it the entire campaign, never regretted it. Here's what I like a lot about the Chain Armor, okay? A lot of the defensive items in this game say, like, when attacked, you gain shield, whatever, for the end of the round. So those ones are, you can't choose when to use them. It's if you are attacked, that activates immediately. Chain Armor is one that you choose. So during your turn, gain shield 1 for the rest of the round. So you can kind of maximize this. If I know there's only going to be one enemy hitting me or trying to attack me, this might only prevent 1 damage, so I don't really care. But if you're running into a new room and there's a pack of 3 or 4 enemies, that's when you use the Chain Armor, and it might soak up 3 or 4 damage instead. And because it's a refreshable ability, and because this is only a 9-card class, the amount of times you're going to long rest throughout a scenario, even if it's just once or twice, getting to reuse stuff like this and the Eagle Eye Goggles, and we're going to see a pattern with a lot of these refresh cards. The Chain Armor is just for 30 bucks, like maybe the best bang for your buck of any item I got in the campaign for this class. Excellent item. So next we're going to the hand items. At the end of the campaign, I had 2 single hand items. I had the Tower Shield and the Poison Dagger. Obviously, 1 defensive, 1 offensive. The Tower Shield is kind of pricey at 40, but when damaged by an attack, gain shield 2 for the attack. So it's a better shield than the Chain Armor, but like I said, you can't choose when, it kind of just activates. But again, it can be refreshed. Poison Dagger is great. During your melee attack, add poison to a single attack. What makes this card so good in this class goes back to those multi-attack cards, like I was talking about with Drill Fist, and we saw that other level 9 one, and there's another one at level 1, can't remember what it's called, the one that has the attack 1 and loot on the bottom. But when you're doing these multiple attacks in a row, you can use the Poison Dagger first, so that your first attack poisons the enemy, and then your follow-up attacks are going to be able to capitalize on that poison. So that's awesome, and because you're often the tank, you're the one engaging, a lot of the time you're going to get in there early, poison, and then maybe your hatchet can follow up and take advantage of that. When I looked at the items at first, I kind of underestimated this one for a while, and then once I actually got it into my build and I started using it, I found the Poison Dagger, I just didn't really want to give it up. Another option, though, that I had at one point that I got earlier in my campaign was the Battle Axe. 25 gold. It is a single hand item, and it's during your single target melee attack ability, turn the attack into the following. So you basically turn it into hit both hexes in front of you instead of just one. It can be really good, but it really depends. Again, it's one of those situational things. Maybe in a campaign with more players, again, there's more enemies, higher chance of this, but I brought the Battle Axe for a while, had a few scenarios where it didn't really come in handy, so I think I swapped it out for the Poison Dagger, and I was happy with that choice. Next, we'll go on to feat items. So you will remember I mentioned winged shoes. If you don't come across... Another minor spoiler here is that the item I ended up going with is the one you unlock in the solo scenario for the Demolitionist, which is the jet boots. And it's just a strict improvement on the winged shoes, because not only do you get jump for the movement, but you also get +1 move. It's also a refreshable item, so basically as soon as I found the jet boots in another scenario, I just sold off the winged shoes because this is an upgrade. But either way, you want one or the other on the Demolitionist because you want that reusable jump over and over throughout the scenario. Can't go wrong with that. And now onto the small items. So early on, obviously I said take healing potion first. I would almost never suggest this for most classes because stamina potions in this game are just so good for getting back cards, which increases your longevity, which gives you your best abilities back, etc., etc. Later in the campaign, the stamina potion is probably going to be more useful than the healing potion, so you're definitely going to want to pick one up as soon as you can afford it, the 10 gold. Another one I came across in my campaign, Ring of Strength, is awesome because you activate it and during your turn you gain Strengthen. So this will... you get strength and you get your advantage. Again, I talked about how that's such a good modifier deck, but because it's so slimmed down, your null is a little more common than most modifier decks, so having strengthen is so useful, especially in these really key moments. So having the Ring of Strength is, I wouldn't say essential, but once you've unlocked it, if you can afford it, I don't see any reason to buy a different small item over it. Okay, and another, the last small item that I would take, it's one I got really late in the campaign, is Oak Charm. During your turn, perform a Bless range 5 action. So you can bless yourself, bless the hatchet, whatever you want. Your modifier deck is already so good. I ended up having an Oak Charm on both characters, and I think I usually used it to just give the blessings to the hatchet because they benefit from them more. Yeah, otherwise, Mana Potion is an optional other item. I had mana potions on each one at certain points throughout the campaign, but I didn't find I really ever used them or really needed them all that badly. So, I mean, if you have the space, sure, they're fine, but there are other cards that'll do, or other items that'll do more for you in that slot. Okay, so now let's look at perks. As I mentioned, one of the best modifier decks in all of Gloomhaven, I think. So I'm going to just give you a kind of brief order that I kind of went in these. I think it's really important to prioritize the remove 2 -1s, both first. Pretty standard across Gloomhaven. It's always good to get rid of those. After that, there's a very interesting one here for the Demolitionist, which is remove 4 +0 cards. I took that third. So your modifier deck starts with 20 cards. If you've gone with those 3 as your first, right there you've already removed 8 cards, 4 of which are -1s and 4 of which are 0s. So you're already leaving yourself with a lot of these kind of really stronger +1s. You got your +2 in there. You're already thinning it down quite a bit. The next one I took might seem odd, but it's the remove 1 -2 and 1 +1 card. Sure, you take out the +1, but getting that -2 out of there early is really nice. Now you've got a 10 card modifier deck, literally half the size you started with, just with 4 perks. So yes, it increases the chance of getting all your plus cards and your crit, but it also starts to increase the chance of your null coming up. So that's where you kind of want to stop and start focusing on then boosting the deck. So after your first 4 perks, for your number 5 and 6, I'm going to recommend you take the add 1 +2 card. Once you take both of those, that's going to bump your modifier deck back up to 12 cards. So those +2s are really going to be helping a lot by adding those in. Beyond that, the rest of the ones I took were all the ones that replace something with something better. So you're either replacing like, a +1 with a +2 that also gives you an element, or you're replacing a 0 with a +2 that gives a status effect or whatever. I would prioritize the ones that give you fire over the ones that give you earth, and also the ones that give muddle or poison are really good too. The quicker you can get those -1s out of there, the better. By the time I hit level 7 and I had 12 perks, in my 12 card modifier deck, other than the null, every single card was positive. Even the next worst one is like just add poison to an attack, and I think there were like 5 cards with a +2. You just get so strong by the end, but again, this is where the strengthen comes into play for not having those nulls come out. Amazing modifier deck, very fun class to play. All right, now we are on to the Hatchet. So the Hatchet is also a fairly fragile class, obviously stays more at range than the Demolitionist, but same amount of health all the way up to level 9. 10 card hand instead of 9, so a little bit more longevity there. But again, mostly ranged attacks, mostly single target. Very little things that hit multiple enemies or AoE type stuff where you can hit clumps. The other thing is there's a little more flexibility. I'd say there's more situational cards. It's a bit less clear what are the best cards to take each scenario, but I'm going to go over all that in this section here. Okay, so the first and most important level 1 card here is called the Favorite, and this is basically the main mechanic that sets the Hatchet apart. So we'll look at the bottom card for bottom ability first. Wound 3, target an adjacent enemy, move 3, jump. With a 17 initiative especially, this is awesome. Having a move 3 jump right from level 1 that's reusable is super useful. But look at the top. So once you activate this, it's going to go above your card, your player sheet, and it's going to stay active for the rest of the scenario. You basically gain one of those little tokens, and you can add +3 attack to any of your ranged attacks by moving the token from this card to the target after the attack ability is resolved. So basically what that means is you're picking an enemy that is going to be your favorite, and you're basically launching an additional +3 attack on it after you hit it with a ranged attack. That token will stay with that enemy as that enemy moves around, and it'll remain as your kind of favorite. And then once that enemy dies, it drops the token in that hex, and then to get that token back on the card to redeploy it later, you'll need to loot the token. So you'll either use a loot ability or end your turn there, get the token back on your card, and then later in the scenario, remember the card stays out, and then you can pick a different target to put as your favorite, get that bonus attack, and keep using it. So you're going to see there's a theme all throughout where I'm going to be referring to the favorite over and over, so don't forget about this card. One of your best and most important cards. So the first card at level 1 that plays off your favorite token is a Retrieval. As you can see, move 1, loot 1, nothing really special. You're not going to do a lot of looting with the Hatchet because you're going to be at range. Leave that for your Demolitionist, so unless you're using that to pick up your favorite token, probably not going to come in handy all that often. And the top 2, again, if you're not grabbing your favorite token, it's just an attack 2, which you can use the basic attack on any card. So Retrieval's alright for level 1 card, but as you level up, you won't find much use for it. Next up's Follow Through, another one that plays off the favorite token. So look at the top, attack 2, range 4, attack or add +2 attack and gain an XP if your target has your favorite token. So once something already has your favorite token, you can do an extra good attack on it, but again, it's a bit situational. Bottom, move 2, push 2, target an adjacent enemy, and then you can consume wind to move 2 again. We're going to see the most common element for the Hatchet is wind. It's not quite as useful, I would say, as fire was for the Demolitionist. And this is a fairly situational card. Brought it sometimes, but even when I did, it wasn't always easy to take advantage of that top with the favorite token, so decent but nothing special. Okay, now we're going to get to some of the better cards at level 1, starting with Disorienting Barrage. This might be your most important level 1 card, or definitely one of them. I mentioned before that this class focuses mostly on single target, powerful attacks, like hitting bosses and stuff, but Disorienting Barrage is an attack 1, range 3, target 3, and muddle. So I'll say right now, this is one of the best cards for your first turn of a scenario. If you can reach, 2 or 3 enemies at range 3, especially if you can go early on with another card, which I'm going to show you in a moment. This will allow you to hit a bunch of guys and muddle them before they take their turns and attack, so they're going to be at a disadvantage. 51 initiative is obviously not very good. And then the bottom has a situational loss where you can move, all adjacent enemies suffer 1, move 1, all adjacent enemies suffer 2. Again, this suffer thing, it avoids shield, so you can potentially be doing 3 unpreventable damage to shielded enemies with the bottom. Super powerful card. Next up, we've got Center Mass. This one's kind of just a standard workhorse card. 24 initiative, attack 3, range 3 on top is pretty standard. We're going to see a lot of the attack 3, range 3 with this class. And on the bottom, you've got a move 3, which there's a few of these move 3 cards, and this one gives an optional push 2 to an adjacent enemy. So it's just a very reliable card. You know what you're getting. It's not hard to make it work well for you. Next up, we've got Power Pitch, another move 3, just like the one we just looked at. But this one's got worse initiative, but it comes with wind. The only thing is that if you're not using that top ability for that loss attack, that attack 6, then carrying around a 60 initiative card just as a move 3 for wind might not be enough. Especially if you're not using it for the wind, then carrying a card around all scenario just for the move 3 isn't worth it. But the attack 6 loss up top might be good in, like, let's say a boss scenario where if you know you're going to need the wind for something, then this could be a decent card. So bring it whenever you feel like it fits in. Next up, we've got Second Wind. another move 3, but this one's actually got a good initiative, nice and early with 18. And on the bottom it says add +2 move and gain an XP if you killed an enemy this round. So if you attack someone else first and then you move, you can potentially move 5 and gain an XP. So right away, I think this one's kind of an upgrade on the last 2 move 3 card abilities that we saw. And on the top, you've got a loss that's a heal 6 self. As I mentioned, these classes don't have a lot of healing. I brought this one sometimes, but I found I didn't always use the heal because if you're doing a good enough job doing the proper tanking with your Demolitionist up front, if your Hatchet's not taking a lot of damage, you might not need the heal. But again, because it also comes with a move 3 that can be a move 5, I would say it's a better option than the Power Pitch card, but again, it's kind of situational. Maybe bring it if you think there's a particularly damage-heavy scenario where you're going to need the heal. Next up is Close Cuts. Everything we've looked at so far, I believe, for this class so far is ranged attacks, and here you've got 2 different melee ones. On the top, we've got a double Hex melee attack for 3 that gains you an XP, and on the bottom, we have an attack 2, move 2. Really good initiative too, 25. This is just another one of those kind of workhorse cards. I would kind of put this in the category as center mass, where you kind of know what you're getting. You're not going to spend a lot of time doing melee attacks, but if you can set this up where you, let's say, used a late initiative card last turn and ended your turn next to someone, you can start off the next round by, using the bottom to attack and then move out of the way, or hit 2 enemies at once with the top. So really not a bad card, but it just takes a little bit more planning than some of your other easy ones. Next up, we've got Stopping Power. So these are some of the kind of more situational cards now, I would say, that we're getting into. Stopping Power, attack 3, range 2. You can extend the range and push with the top. It's fine, but if you don't have the wind, then attack 3, range 2. I mean, we've already seen a couple cards that have attack 3, range 3. So if you don't have the wind, it's kind of worse. The bottom has a move 3 jump and this immobilize thing that gives you the loss. It can be good, but I found every time I took this card, I didn't have the wind to make the top work, and then by the time I was late in the scenario, I didn't need the bottom, so I'm sure you can make it work, but I didn't find much use in it myself. Next up is Double Throw. This is tricky. I'm normally very skeptical about any card that has 2 loss abilities, because if you're not going to use it early, then you're basically just carrying around this card all scenario that you're just going to use the basic move 2 or attack 2 until you may or may not even use the loss. So I brought this one a couple times. I think a couple times I did make pretty good use of it. The bottom is, I think, where you might see some good use. The double the value of your next attack this round. So early in the game, if your attacks are like 2 or 3, you're not going to save this all scenario to double an attack and do 2 or 3 more damage and lose a card. You have tons of cards that can attack for 2 or 3. But later on, when you're powerful and you have items that boost your attacks, or for example, you go into a boss fight, imagine you've got a base attack, 5, 6, 7. If you're doubling that up, that is huge, and that can actually pick off the most dangerous enemy in a scenario, again, especially a boss. The top is a little more situational. You probably won't use it, but again, I would say for boss fights, definitely consider this. Otherwise, probably not worth bringing. Now we get onto the X cards from level 1. And honestly, these are way better than the Demolitionist's X cards, I would say. Care Package is a card that when I first saw it, didn't think I'd see much use. And if you're playing in a 3 or 4 player party, or you have a Void Warden in your party, you probably won't see this as much. But I found this was actually one of the most useful cards to have with the Hatchet, because you've got a heal on the top and the bottom. And unlike your other heal card, you can heal your allies with this. So with the bottom, you can move 3 and then heal 1 right next to something. Or at the top, you can actually land an attack 2 and then heal an adjacent ally. So ideally, if you can make use of the top, it's perfect. But even if, again, don't look at the heal 1, the heal 2. Think about how much your Demolitionist is going to be in the middle of battle, and they're going to need you to get rid of their, status effects, their poison, their wound, that kind of stuff. And this is huge for that. So Care Package, I took, honestly, in almost every scenario, and I did not regret it. I got so much use out of this card. Fancy Hat. Okay, this card is a little odd. It's got a move on top, which you don't see very often in any class, really. But we'll come back to that. 12 initiative would become your earliest initiative. The bottom, add +1 attack to all your attacks this round. If you remember the card I mentioned before, Disorienting Barrage, the one that has the attack 1, range 3, target 3, the one that spreads the muddle, Fancy Hat is the best card to pair with that, especially as a scenario opener. If you've got range on 2 or 3 enemies at the start, your best first turn is Fancy Hat with Disorienting Barrage, because you get to go at 12 initiative before probably everyone else, and then you actually get to do attack 2 on all 3 of those and muddle them. Excellent combo. Fancy Hat is just a great card. And the top, again, it's weird. Move 3, shield 2, for the rest of the round, but it's a loss. You have ways that you can move sometimes 4, 5, 6 later in the game with Hatchet. To pair that with something where you can potentially move 7, 8, 9 in total in one turn, you might have scenarios where you just have to go grab something in a room, go get a chest and run, or do something. So the movement really helps. And the other thing is, because you're relying so heavily on your Demolitionist to do your tanking, every once in a while the Demolitionist is going to be in a tight spot and they're going to need you to do some tanking. And having the ability to move 3 and then pop the shield 2 is so valuable. I can't tell you how many times I use this card all throughout for boosting attacks, and then later on I thought my Demolitionist was going to die and I was able to get the Hatchet in there, use that top, and sometimes it completely saved me. So don't underestimate the top of this card. Final one is Extra Lift. I won't spend a lot of time on this because really I barely used it. It's pretty much to help. The bottom obviously helps you get a bunch more movement throughout the scenario, which I just don't find you really were desperate for movement as much with the Hatchet. You're often just kind of hanging out in the background. You've got lots of range to kind of just fire away at things. So I found the bottom wasn't really useful or necessary. And then the top, again, if you don't have wind, it's an attack 2 range 3, and you have so many attack 3s. So very situational. If you're going a heavy wind build, might be useful, but otherwise I'd say leave it behind. So while you're still at level 1, in my opinion, you should probably be taking the following 6 cards to pretty much every scenario, I would say. The Favorite, Disorienting Barrage, Center Mass, Close Cuts, Care Package, and Fancy Hat. Aside from those 6, you've got a few other situational ones. I mentioned the 2 with the move 3s on the bottom that have the losses on the top. There's Second Wind for the healing or Power Pitch for the attack. So I would say consider those ones. Retrieval if you want to really focus on getting your favorite token back. I would really only consider the other ones like Double Throw if you're going to a boss fight, or Follow Through if you're again trying to play more around that favorite token, or you're going with Wind to get that extra move on the bottom. But yeah, those last few you can kind of fill in the gaps beyond those 6 highly recommended ones. So now we're going to get into the section of level 2 to 9 cards. So remember, there are spoilers ahead. If you'd like to avoid them, just use the timestamps below to skip ahead. Otherwise, let's jump into level 2 now. Okay, so level 2, we've got a couple decent choices, nothing incredible. I went with Repeat Shot. It's got the top attack 3, range 3, which we've seen is fairly standard for the class, but add +2 attack and gain an XP if the target has your favorite token. So it's just, again, gives you that extra boost if you can capitalize on that. 31 initiatives, okay, nothing crazy special, but that bottom, attack 5, range 3, loss, it's, again, good to have an attack option on the bottom, especially when you go into boss fights or when you're dealing with a really pesky enemy and you know that your one attack on the top of another card is not going to be enough. To have this kind of as a reliable attack 3 throughout a scenario over and over, and then suddenly you have that kind of ace up your sleeve to get that big attack on the bottom, can be really useful. The other option, Ricochet, definitely has more potential for like the interesting plays. If I was playing in a bigger group, I probably would have taken it, because attack 2, range 3, then you get another attack 2, target a different enemy within range 2 of the target of the previous attack ability. So again, if there's a bunch more enemies out there, it's going to be easier to trigger that, but in smaller groups, it's not going to come into play as much. And then obviously the bottom is a loss ability, and it involves being adjacent to enemies, which if you've watched up to this point, you'll know I don't think you should be up close to your enemies as the Hatchet. Almost everything you do is ranged. You don't want disadvantage. You're pretty fragile. So yeah, I definitely went with Repeat Shot at level 2. So level 3 is an awesome card. I definitely went with Sharpened Blades here. Up to this point, up to level 2, we've only seen the most movement you can get as a standard move is move 3. There's other ways to get up to move 5. This one starts the standard move 4. If you consume wind, it goes to +2, so you can move 6. Having just a baseline 4 is already awesome. And then the top ability here, on your next 5, it's a loss. Once you set it up, it stays there. And for your next 5 attacks, you had +1 attack and wound. This is just awesome because it kind of just powers you up. You've got other ways that you can wound things, but not all of your attacks do. Because you've got this crazy good range with the Hatchet, you can really pick off which enemies you want to wound early in a scenario so that they keep taking that wound damage. And the other thing is, if you already have this activated before your Disorienting Barrage, the one that spreads and hits 3 targets, now it's going to wound them all in addition to muddling, and it's going to deal an extra damage. So yeah, really, really good card. The other option, Fearsome Efficiency, it's obviously an interesting card, but it's, again, we come back to the whole situational nature of it. The bottom, sure, it's an attack 1, range 3. Add +2 attack and gain 1 if you killed an enemy this round. So again, your first move would have had to have killed something before you then do this. If you didn't, it's just an attack 1, which isn't much. And then the top is a loss, which again is not going to read the whole thing, but attack 6, range 4, and you can see that it's just another situational ability. You have to take into account where things are on the map kind of thing, whether or not it kills it. So for me, Sharpened Blades was the choice here. Okay, level 4 brings a really, really great card, probably the best one you've unlocked at a new level up to this point. The top is just attack 3, range 4, which is already better than the range 3 of all those standard ones, and if you've got the wind, you can add an attack, a range, and gain an XP. Very solid, just reusable, reliable card. And then on the bottom, you've got this loss ability that you don't want to activate this too early, but late in the scenario, this can be pretty deadly. So it's a loss once you put it up there. The next 5 times an enemy ends a movement ability within range 5, perform an attack 2, range 5 action targeting that enemy. So you get some XP along the way, and you can basically be attacking enemies when it's not even your turn. This is so useful when you're playing with 2 characters and you want to, especially when you're kind of falling behind, you feel like you're running out of time in the scenario. You've already lost certain cards, and you feel the walls closing in, or sometimes those scenarios where they're spawning all these little pesky enemies that just keep appearing and multiplying. Something like this, if you go first and then they each move and you're attacking them all, imagine also having the wound ability on that other card queued up where you're also wounding them all when they move. Just a great ability. The alternative here, Rip from the Flesh, is cool, but the top and the bottom, like, there isn't any movement or attack, which are the standard things that you need in this game. I kind of went over before, I won't get into again why you probably don't need loots with the hatchet, but you can also do maybe a bit of damage and wound, situational. The bottom, yeah, you've got a heal 3 at range 2, but again, if you didn't kill an enemy at the end of this round, or this round, you don't get anything else from it other than that, and you don't want a card just sitting in your hand that's going to be most often just a basic move 2 or attack 2 until you can maybe use a better ability, especially because Overwatch is just such a good card, so take Overwatch and don't look back. Okay, level 5, I've got to warn you again, just like with the Demolitionist, there is a major spoiler for this class at level 5, so if you want to avoid that, skip ahead. If you're still here, then I will tell you that level 5 is where you get the new favorite, which is basically just a strict upgrade on the favorite card from level 1. So the initiative's 2 earlier, I think it was 17, this one's 15. You get an attack 2 immobilize with a move 4 that produces wind. So the bottom is, you don't get the jump that the other one had, but you get more movement and a maybe more reliable good attack there. The top is strictly an enhancement though. You might remember the other token, or the other card for the favorite, was that when you move that token, you can add a +3 attack. This one gives you still the +3 attack, but it also adds a wound and a push onto that. So this basically is just a more souped up version of the favorite, but this one says specifically this card cannot be active while the favorite is active. So I'll be honest, as soon as I hit level 5, I basically put the favorite card from level 1 back in the box, didn't use it again because you really don't need both, and this one's definitely an upgrade. And you get a nice little bonus, another mini from the box, which is a nice little axe that you get to use as a replacement to your token. Level 6 gives you some interesting choices, because both of these cards come with a move 3 on the bottom, but look at the initiative on quick turnaround. 11 would become your best. It comes with the move 3. If your favorite token is in or adjacent to your hex, you may perform loot 1, so kind of a situational thing, but look at the top. Attack 4, range 3, push 2. That right there is guaranteed, which is already way better than any of your attack 3, range 3s, plus you can consume the wind for the extra range, +2 push, and the XP, so this one is just always reliably already very good, and then has the potential to just be even better. Bombardment, we go back to again one of these more situational ones. Yeah, it's got a move 3 on the bottom as well. All adjacent enemies suffer a damage, but again, you shouldn't be really getting up close to that many enemies with the hatchet. The push is going to be situational. The top can be really, really powerful, but it's just another one of those loss abilities, and when you're weighing that against quick turnaround, for me, just having a card that has that early initiative and that guaranteed attack 4 at range is just something you can't pass up, so I took quick turnaround. Okay, level 7. Keep in mind I hit level 7 right before I went to the final boss, so my choice here was influenced by the fact that I knew I was going right into the final boss scenario afterwards, which is why I took Excessive Force. So you get the move 3 on the bottom, you can consume a wind to add an attack 2, range 2, which to move and get any attack on the bottom afterwards is already pretty crazy, but to have it be a ranged attack afterwards is very, very cool. And on the top, on your next 5 attacks targeting an enemy that has your favorite token, add +2 attack. So again, if you're fighting the final boss, or really any boss or high hit point enemy, just throw this down right before you go up to them, throw that favorite token on them, and then every attack you do is going to hit them extra hard. So this was awesome for the final boss. Brutalize was the other option here, which can also be very good against a boss because it's an attack 4 and you are adding a +2 attack if the target has your favorite token. But again, it's melee. Why are you going to get up in the enemy's face and go melee with the hatchet when you've got all these amazing ranged attacks and you've already got a demolitionist to get up there for you, right? And then the bottom, I mean, an attack 5 range 4 stun is crazy, but for a one-time loss, it just doesn't outweigh what excessive force is going to do for you, especially against a boss. So I would recommend excessive force here. So keep in mind, I only actually hit level 8 as soon as I beat the final scenario, so I've not actually played with any of these cards, but if I had hit level 8 sooner, I probably would have gone with Shrapnel. I mean, Shrapnel's the more offensive card, and Camaraderie is the defensive one, right? So Shrapnel is the attack 2, range 3, target 2, wound. You can add another target if you've got the wind. And at the bottom, you have ways to basically do additional damage to adjacent enemies where you've killed something. So it's very offensive, but to get the most effect out of it, you have to kind of set it up a bit. Camaraderie, you don't attack at all with it. You just move, well, I mean, I guess the bottom has the +2 attack if your next attack this turn you're adjacent to an ally. But again, you only have one ally. How often are you going to be standing right next to the Demolitionist? Probably not that often. So it usually is going to be just a move 3. The top is a heal 3 self, heal 3 target on adjacent ally. So I would say if you get to the point in your campaign where you hit level 8, just decide, do you feel like you need a bit more of that offense? If so, go with Shrapnel. If you find you're really desperate for heals, then take Camaraderie. Alright, level 9 is a really fun level for this class just because they're very different cards. You might remember that in the original Gloomhaven there were these insta-kill cards where it was just like kill an adjacent enemy or kill an elite enemy or whatever. They got rid of those. This is almost the closest thing you'll get to it though. It's a loss ability. One adjacent normal or elite enemy suffers 12 damage. So it's not attack 12. You don't have to draw out your modifier deck and risk getting a null. Shields don't come into play. Just deal 12 damage to something. No questions asked pretty much. And then you also create a dark element and you get 2 XP. So it's fitting for the title of the card, Executioner's Axe. Very cool card to just pick an enemy and kill it essentially. Unless it's a boss, might not kill it. The bottom is so situational though. If you killed an enemy this round, return your favorite token to its card and gain 1. It's a very cool way to get your favorite token back from far away, right? You've got these range 3, range 4 attacks. If you can get it back instead of actually having to go up and loot the token, it can be useful. But look at Heartseeker. Attack 4, range 4, stun, and you can consume a wind to wound. Just long term, you would get so much more value and use out of this. You can stamina potion, take it back, keep using it throughout the scenario, whereas the Executioner's Axe is just going to be the one-time kind of kill something, you're done with it. Plus Heartseeker comes with the heal and bless thing on the bottom, so I'd probably go with Heartseeker if I'd hit level 9, but Executioner's Axe could be fun too. It just really depends what you're hoping to do. So that's it for all the cards. If you're looking for some advice on what to go into that final boss scenario with, just for reference, I took Excessive Force, Quick Turnaround, the new favorite, Overwatch, Sharpened Blades, Repeat Shot, and then for level 1 cards I had, or X cards, I had Care Package, Disorienting Barrage, Fancy Hat, and of course Double Throw for that bottom attack boost on doubling your attack. So good luck if you get to the final boss, and I hope these cards work out for you. Now let's talk about items. So when you get your first 30 starting gold, there's going to be some options. You can go for some defensive, you can get some of those small items. I went with the Throwing Hammer. It's 30 gold, so that's all of it. It's a single hand item, but during your ranged attack, add stun to a single attack. I can't stress enough, early on when you have barely any, health and items and you don't deal a whole lot of damage, sometimes even just stunning one of like 3 enemies in a room can really buy you some time, can be super useful. I thought it was a bit of a gamble at first, but I was really happy with the Throwing Hammer. I think it's a great choice for a first item, so that's what I'll highly recommend. Now we're going to get into my sort of final item build, where there's of course tons of spoilers, so if you don't want to see any of these, skip ahead to the next section, which is the perks. Otherwise, let's get right into items based on each category. So first off, I went with, for the head item, Eagle Eye Goggles. Talked about this for the Demolitionist as well. This is just super useful for the Hatchet. You have a bigger modifier deck, and sometimes it takes a bit to draw through and get to those better cards, so having the advantage really does help. And the other thing is, because you have stuff like Disorienting Barrage that's hitting multiple targets in one turn, having the advantage for all of those is really, really good. So, the other thing is, couldn't really think of or find a head item that seemed better, and especially when you later in the game have these turns where you're doing the supercharged attack, like an attack 6 that's doubled or something. You cannot afford to pull a null like against a boss and just lose all that damage. So you really need the Eagle Eye Goggles or something to strengthen yourself. For a chest item, when I was able to afford it and I unlocked it later in the game, I would think your best option is probably going to be the Robes of Evocation, which is during your attack, consume any element to add +1 attack to the entire attack action. So you can use this essentially to boost your Disorienting Barrage even one more attack for all 3 enemies that it's hitting. Great card, or great item. Before I got this, I had picked up an item in a scenario called the Flea-Bitten Shawl, which is 10 gold. It says you're considered to have an initiative of 99 for the purpose of enemy focusing. This can be really useful too, because you can get into a spot where you're equal distance away from an enemy as the Demolitionist, but they're going to default to attacking the Demolitionist. So it lets you get closer without putting yourself in more danger, but it's a weird situational one that I found hard to capitalize often enough. Plus, it just doesn't do a whole lot. It's only 10 gold. If you're looking for a defensive item, just pick up the chain armor like we have for the Demolitionist. Excellent defensive item. But otherwise, if you can afford it, take the Robes of Evocation. Now onto feat items. I would say just take the Winged Shoes. Again, jump is so useful in this game. There's so many traps. There's difficult terrain to cross. And in a bigger party, this might not be as important for the hatchet, but because your Demolitionist is so reliant on you to stay close and be able to heal, to bail them out of situations, the Winged Shoes are pretty important for getting into proper positioning. So I definitely recommend those for your feat item. Now for hand items, you've got a few options. So obviously I suggested starting with a throwing hammer. You can technically play that one out for the whole campaign. I ended up switching it out at one point. At one point you get to the solo scenario for the hatchet, or if you come across the city event that leads you there, you will get the barbed axe if you complete that scenario, which is during your attack add wound to the entire attack action. So this is another one that's perfect for, pop this item right before your Disorienting Barrage to add wound to that 3 target spray with the muddle. Anything else you have, like if you really just need to wound a single target, very useful. Kind of pricey, but again, if you got it in that one scenario, it would have been free. Volatile Bomb is the other option I took. During your single target ranged attack, turn attack into the following, which basically makes it a 3-hex AoE thing. This is awesome because, again, you have this ability with the hatchet to have these supercharged attacks that hit 1 target, and then if you just pop the Volatile Bomb with it, it splits it and hits 3. So I went with Barbed Axe and Volatile Bomb at the end, but if you feel like you need the stun, you can maybe just hold on to the Throwing Hammer and pick one of the other ones to go with it. And now we finally get on to the small items. One of your most important ones is going to be the Power Potion, because it just, again, gives you +1 attack for the whole action, which, again, goes perfectly with that Disorienting Barrage. Stamina Potion is just always good for any character. I don't need to get into that. The Ring of Haste is interesting. At the end of your turn, play 1 card from your hand and immediately perform the bottom action of that card. So obviously, most often on the bottom, you're going to see movement abilities. So if you need to get around somewhere, this can let you get in somewhere, do an attack, and then maybe back off so you're out of range. But the other thing is, you've seen that this class, the hatchet, can also have some really good attacks on the bottom, like an attack 5 loss, I think. So imagine you do your turn, you take your attacks, and then you play this and play another attack. So good for picking off a really strong enemy, or especially in boss fights. Definitely pick up the Ring of Haste if you can afford it. And finally, the Oak Charm, which we saw for the Demolitionist, which is one where you can just bless anyone at range 5. Usually use it on yourself rather than the Demolitionist. You'll make better use of it as the hatchet. The only other items I'd considered as small items are a Mana Potion, which, as we went over before, probably won't be too useful, but if you find you're lacking the wind you need for some of your abilities, not a bad choice. The other one I came across that I unlocked in a scenario was the Fateful Compass, which allows you to force an enemy within range 3 to perform a move 2 action with you controlling the action. This is awesome, and at early levels, I kept this more than half of my campaign, because you can just walk an enemy into a trap, or walk them over to next to an obstacle that you're going to destroy with the Demolitionist, or just bring something into range. Like, this is so useful for just manipulating the battleground how you want and putting an enemy where you need them to be. But again, might not have room for it at higher levels when you have more important cards. So that's it for items. So the perks for the hatchet are definitely not as powerful or as interesting as the modifier deck you're going to be able to get with the Demolitionist, so I won't spend as much time on this, but the main thing is you're going to start again with those 2 remove 2 -1 cards just to get those out of the way. Beyond that, you're not doing as much thinning your deck out, removing cards as you do with the Demolitionist. This is mostly about replacing and upgrading your cards. So I'm not going to go over all these, but most of them involve either removing a +0 or a +1 card and upgrading it to something better. The next 3 or 4 after the remove -1s, I kind of tended to lean on towards the ones that gave you the additional status effects, like the ones that turn a 0 into a +1 poison or a +1 wound, or turn a +0 card into a +0 with a stun, because with your, especially that disorienting barrage that I keep going back to, adding, stunning one of those 3 or adding a wound, like these things, the status effects really add up, and the Demolitionist doesn't have a ton of that. So these are great for the hatchet. Once you've done some of those replacing, then you can kind of just throw in the ones that give you, elements, or the like add +2 with wind card. Again, adding more +2 is always great, and wind is an element you make use of. So yeah, you can kind of, once you get past the initial ones, you can kind of go wherever you want with the replacing. So we are almost at the end of the guide. I just want to leave you with a few tips for playing these 2 classes together. So I found, especially because you're doing this solo, you're going to maybe be a bit overwhelmed by looking at, your cards for the one class, you figure out what you're going to do, and then you pick up the cards for the other class and you look and you think, oh, maybe these aren't as good, maybe I should, and then you're going back and forth and switching. I would say it's best to lead with the Demolitionist and follow with the hatchet. The Demolitionist's positioning is way more important because you need them to do the majority of the tanking, and most of their attacks are melee, so you need to make sure you're up close. If you miscalculate and your hatchet goes where they think they want to go, and then your Demolitionist can't get into play, not only is the hatchet going to maybe end up tanking damage you don't want, but then your Demolitionist might not even be able to get their attacks off. So always, always, always focus on the Demolitionist. Your hatchet has enough range that you can kind of maneuver and usually hit something somewhere, so focus on getting the Demolitionist in and then play around that with your hatchet. Hatchet's way more flexible. The other thing is, I mentioned before, I cannot stress enough how useful it is to do your looting with the Demolitionist. I bought probably half the items that my hatchet had in this campaign were bought through the Demolitionist, because the Demolitionist was the one getting all the gold, and then I would just buy items. The other thing is, you can even pass items back and forth. There was items sometimes I would give to another, from one to the other, just for a scenario or 2 and swap it back. You can try stuff out, take advantage of that, experiment. There's a lot of fun stuff to discover. The other thing is, this is all about timing. Some of the cards I highlighted, like that Explosive Blitz, I believe it's called, for Demolitionist, where you run into the room and stun everything within range 3, or when to use these really powerful loss abilities. There is so much of this that is timing, and especially when you're playing these 2 classes, there's a bit more risk involved because you don't have as much healing and damage prevention. So a lot of the time you're going into these scenarios thinking, sure, I'm at 3 health and there's 1 room left and the other, character is at 2 health and is poisoned, but am I going to spend 2 or 3 turns like resting and healing, or am I going to just see if I can go in there and kill 3 or 4 more guys to end this thing? And there's all these kind of moments where you're right on the edge and you have to take this gamble, and that's part of what's going to make this so fun playing these 2 classes for you, I think, is you're going to scrape by the edge of your teeth sometimes in these scenarios, but that's what makes these so fun to play. And that is it for the guide. So get out there with your Demolitionist and blow stuff up, get your hatchet there, throw some axes at enemies from range, have some fun. Don't stress too much if you get a little rule wrong here or there. There's a lot to keep track of in this game. You're going to be playing it solo. Just power through and get through. You're going to have a blast with this. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please consider giving it a like, subscribe, tell a friend about it. And to be honest, if you didn't like the video, that's fine too. No hard feelings. Don't like or subscribe, but tell us why you didn't like it so I can make it better next time. We're always open to feedback, and we'd love to hear from you. Have you played yet? Are you looking to play with these 2 classes? I hope this helps you out. But that's it for me for today, so thanks for watching, and now go kill some monsters.